I have personally been involved in fighting the cabal that we call the Khazarian Mafia for 20 years. And it's been very frustrating to see that they're still sitting in power after all this. However, uh, you know, it really does look like it will end. Let's start by looking back at how much has changed. Around 2004, the U.S. was in the middle of a project for a new American century. They were going to grab all the oil in the Middle East. They were going to take control of space. They were going to use bioweapons to control the world. They were the absolute dominant superpower, and nothing even remotely threatened their rule or power. Now, if you look at the most recent events, you'll see that, uh, for example, the genocide in Israel, in Gaza, has left the United States and Israel completely isolated from the rest of the world. Maybe a few servants in Europe and Canada, but basically, it really is almost over. However, the reason it's been taking so long, well, there's several reasons. First of all, the problem that we have in fighting these people is that they are trying to start World War III and kill 90% of humanity. So it's sort of like a hostage situation. We've had to whittle down their power without giving them an excuse to start all of thermonuclear war or some other disaster. And this has taken time. And what's been happening, though, is that time has been on the side of the BRICS alliance. This is basically the group of people that is not controlled by the Khazarian Mafia. They have a superior economic system. The one in China has led to far greater growth. So despite all this talk about the US being the biggest economy in the world, it's just nonsense. The Chinese produce, 22 times more cement, 12 times more steel, 3 times more smartphones, et cetera, et cetera. And this similar situation is happening with Russia, with India, and the United States is really, they have been bankrupt for a long time, but they've always managed to kick the can down the road. It's a good time to remember that famous line from a Hemingway novel, "How did you go bankrupt? Gradually and then suddenly." Uh, the United States was able to, they went bankrupt once in 2008. They were able to get con the Asians into giving them $23 trillion by offering a black communist by the name of Obama. And that kept them going until the end of the Trump presidency. And we thought then it might finally end with Trump, but again, these people have been ruling the planet, especially the West, for thousands of years, and they plan like hundreds of years, decades in advance. So they had been preparing this pandemic we saw in 2021 since at least 1975. And they used all the goodwill built up by Western doctors and Western medicine, volunteers going to help people and fight plagues, all this goodwill. And they used it to con the world into accepting toxic vaccines. Not, I would say, maybe half the world, but this was their hope that they could finally kill 90% of humanity and stay in power by enslaving the rest. And it did blow up in their faces. They failed to kill 90% of humanity. The latest, they killed 17 million people, which is enough to get in serious trouble, but not enough to stay in power. And so we're hoping that finally this autumn we could see the real end. There's a few places we need to watch. First, of course, is Israel. Israel, as it currently exists, is very unlikely to continue. They are running out of soldiers. They are running out of weapons. They don't have friends, and they are economically isolated. They're under a basically a boycott. So I don't see how Israel is going to be able to survive as it stands. The International Criminal Court is filing war crimes charges against Benjamin Netanyahu and these other mass murderers. And once the charges are formally made, we're hoping that Turkey and Egypt will move in and arrest Netanyahu, if it hasn't already happened by the time you see this recording. I'm hoping that this week, when Netanyahu goes to the U.S., he'll be arrested, but I'm not counting on it because, you must never underestimate these people. Now, the other thing we need to look back at is see how many of the big wigs who used to run the world are gone. George Bush Sr. was executed. David Rockefeller is gone. Pope Maledict is gone. Henry Kissinger is gone. Brzezinski is gone. Most of the top, Queen Elizabeth is gone. Unfortunately, I think she was a force for good despite her flaws. But we are now with a completely new generation of leadership. And the other thing is to remember, 90% of the world has been freed from the Khazarian mafia. They are with the BRICS alliance. They are not taking orders from these disease-mongering people. So it looks really bad in the West, but the rest of the world has already shaken off the shackles that these people put on them. They're having a big meeting in October, which hopefully will lead to some very decisive planetary changes. But in any case, what we're going to see this fall, or hope to see this fall, is the collapse of the satanic regime in Israel and the replacement of Israel with the nation state of Judea. And we also need to see what happens in the United States. I know a lot of people are hoping that Donald Trump will be the savior. Let's see. He did make some big moves when he was president. He got rid of a lot of the satanic elite in Hollywood, started cleaning up the deep state, but there was obviously a massive counterattack, as we all saw, with the J6 and the arrest of patriots, the pandemic martial law, and all that sort of nightmare of the Biden administration. That's now coming to an end, but Donald Trump needs to realize that this is not some situation that can be solved just by the United States. It requires the rest of the world. His idea, for example, of raising tariffs would lead to the United States becoming economically marginalized. Any economic historian will tell you that if you just try to block, competition from the rest of the world and isolate yourself, you're going to get left behind. For example, the United States' infrastructure is collapsing, and China could, within a year, completely rebuild all the bridges, highways, and railroads in the United States. They produce the equivalent of one Manhattan every year, and they could do that. They have that much ability. The United States doesn't have the money, and the money they do have is spent on this huge and inefficient military bureaucracy that has become a money-sucking waste pit. And, Colonel Douglas McGregor, who knows a lot more about B than this sort of stuff, but I would say that 90% of the U.S. military expenditure is wasted at this point, and that's a shame. But anyway, getting back to the idea of whether or not we will have a final collapse of the system in the autumn, it depends. I've been told, by people who are very high up in the Illuminati, that we're dealing with two competing timelines, and just when you think the timeline is going to prevail, then the other one kind of bounces back. It's sort of like something swirling around a toilet. It's eventually going to go down the hole, but it just keeps going back and forth, back and forth. As an example, we saw all those children rescued from different, pedophile rings and many different mass arrests, thousands of these people, and yet not a single person on Jeffrey Epstein's client list has been arrested. So you can see how deep this runs. Now, the other thing we need to remember about these people is that they control most of 90% of the world's transnational corporations. and that gives them enormous power. So unless the corporations like Microsoft, Google are temporarily nationalized and ownership is taken away from them, this fight will continue. Uh, Nonetheless, the Chinese are saying that, the BRICS meeting in October will be a game changer. We're also hoping that there will be an end to the post-war system with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and the U.S.-dominated IMF, World Bank, etc., and replaced with a whole new architecture. We hear there's an agreement to make that happen. But again, I've been at it so long, I don't want to get overly optimistic, but this is as close as I've ever seen it. And that's one reason why, for the first time in decades, I have chosen not to go to Canada this summer, but will stay working and pushing to make things happen. One thing I hope to personally accomplish this autumn is to visit North Korea. And I've been told by the people in the Five Eyes that they agree to a unification of the Korean Peninsula. So let's see if something will happen there. I'd love to go. I'd love to show the world the truth about that country, because it's been a victim of a lot of bad press, a lot of it untrue, and I'd like to see for myself exactly what's going on there. But that's one big thing we could expect this autumn. So to summarize, let's see what we're hoping we'll see the end of Israel and replace it with Judea, unification of the Korean Peninsula, and of course the big one is also, I forgot to mention, is Ukraine. I am hearing that a peace deal will be reached, which was already agreed upon more than a decade ago with the Gnostic Illuminati, which is that Russia will take charge of security for Europe, and the Five Eyes will take charge of security for the oceans, and the Chinese will finance both in exchange for a switch to a polycentric world. So we're hoping that will happen, but again, these people always do something nasty, and I don't want to underestimate them. I don't want to get over optimistic, but this is as close as I've seen it since 2008 with the Lehman shock. So maybe this year, finally, the autumn offensive will see the liberation of humanity. And if that happens, I'm hoping it will result in a new grouping of 7 friendly regions, the United States and Canada merging into the United States of North America with a new capital, Judea being born, and Europe uniting with Russia, and many other good things. But the majority of the world wants peace, they want development, and they want humanity to decide for itself what kind of future it wants to build. They're sick and tired of secret inbred elites planning things decades in advance and then staging horrific events like Fukushima and 9/11 to try to force humanity down a path they don't want to go. And I'm pretty sure that's going to end. But again, I'll just keep fighting until this is over. And I'm not going to be overly optimistic. I've been accused of that in the past. But internally, or objectively, if you look at the situation, we really are close to victory. There can be no doubt about it. I'm hoping it'll be this autumn, but I'm not guaranteeing it. All I can say is we need to keep this up, because it's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt now that the elite who control the major corporations and the major Western countries have been trying to kill 90% of humanity, and they have to be removed. It's a fight to the death, and we will win. So with that, I'm going to take a couple weeks off to fast, to detox, try to get in shape, and be ready for what I expect to be a very hectic autumn. And I hope you all do also charge your batteries this summer. And I hope to see you again soon.